Larry Bird played his last game in 1992, so a lot of the present day fans didn't even get to see him play. So they may know the name, but they may not know the game. So today we talk about the 3-time consecutive MVP, one of the best shooters ever, known as Larry Legend. Talk about what made him great, some of the famous rivalries he had, and what made fans love him, plus his impact on the NBA. Let's talk about it today in Covered in Sports. Larry Bird was actually drafted in 1978, but he didn't officially play for the Celtics until 1979. And after that, the NBA created a rule which stated that an NBA team had to wait until a college player was officially ready to leave college before they drafted him. But luckily, Larry didn't play until 1979 because fans would have missed out on that March Madness between Michigan State and Indiana State, in which Larry and his team lost, but it was one of the most legendary matchups, and it would be a foreshadowing for the, Boston Celtics, Los Angeles Lakers rivalry that was to come later on. But instantly, Larry Bird had an impact on his team with the win-losses. It was the greatest, win-loss turnaround up until that point in history. David Thompson had an effect similar to the Spurs, as well as Jason Kidd when he went to the Nets in the early 2000s. But up until that point, Larry had a tremendous effect on the Celtics. They won so many games, made it into the playoffs. They did get eliminated by the 76ers, which was the power team at the time in the Eastern Conference. But him coming into the league, having an instant impact on his team, was a foreshadowing what was also to come as far as his tenure as a Boston Celtic. He restored the Celtics' greatness as they hadn't been relevant for a little while. They won some championships in the 70s. I believe they won 2. But they were having a little dark phase or, a dusty phase where no trophies were being collected and it was just dust sitting on the shelves. And Larry brought that back. They won a Celtics championship in 1981, which was Larry's second year. They had Cedric Maxwell, I believe, who was the Finals MVP of that matchup. But it was clear to see that with Larry's addition to the team, the Celtics were a totally new team from the previous year of 1979 to the 1980 season, and fans were excited to see him. And of course, it was perfect timing for the NBA as now they had this renewed rivalry with the Celtics and the Lakers. Of course, at the helm of the Lakers, Kareem Abdul-Jabbar, Magic Johnson versus Larry Bird, Kevin McHale, Robert Parrish. It was legendary. It was an instant classic. Even though Magic Johnson and the Lakers won a championship prior to Larry Bird, when they matched up in 1984, it was one of the most highly rated finals up until that point. I believe it's still very highly ranked and high up there, but it's been so many years, it's been 40 years, about 40 seasons, so things have changed. But at that time, it was no better matchup, no better rivalry, not to mention the rivalries that existed in the, interconference rivalries, such as the Sixers, the Pistons, matchup with the Hawks. Larry Bird was a, show to see. And in the midst of that rivalry, he was winning MVPs like crazy. He actually did have 3 consecutive MVPs. I have a video where I mentioned it, and that video is about Michael Jordan. You can check it out. But I was pretty surprised because it's such a rare feat for a player to get 3 MVPs, especially in the golden age of the 80s, in which you had Magic, Moses Malone, Dr. J, a little bit of George Gervin. He was on kind of the second half of his career, but you had so many great players. But Larry Bird did deserve every award. He's similar to Magic in his style of play, in which he's very well rounded, but Larry Bird played more defense. He was a much better shooter, much better scorer, and he deserved all the MVPs as well as the final MVPs he won, collecting 3 championships in the 80s, 81, 84, and 86. He has 2 finals MVPs to go with that, and it was just crazy watching them in the 80s. You knew they had a 90% chance of going to the finals, I imagine. I imagine watching the Celtics in the 80s was like watching LeBron when he was on the Heat, or just, that whole time he was on the Heat and the Cavs and etc. But he was going to 10 consecutive finals. It's easy to say that Larry Bird, along with Magic Johnson, created the best rivalry up until that point, or a renewed rivalry, you can say, which was some of the most entertaining basketball we've seen thus far. You'd be hard-pressed to find many shooters better than Larry Bird in his prime. He's a part of the, prestigious 50-40-90 club, in which you shoot 50% from the field, 40% from 3, and of course 90% from the free throw. He's won multiple three-point championships easily, and there's many famous stories of him just, being arrogant, joking, and just being confident about winning the three-point contest, in which he did. And he was just an all-around player, but a prolific scorer, in which many people may forget. He wasn't a fast player, and he kind of reminds me of Luka Doncic in that he's not a fast player, but he's deceptive and he's sneaky. He has his fundamentals, and they're very sharp, and he's able to maneuver and score. He has many 40-point games, and his career high is 60 against the Hawks, in which they had Dominique Wilkins, which was a legendary matchup back then. He had 2 Hall of Famers leading the team. And what people don't really talk about is what people call a super team nowadays. The Celtics kind of had that. Kevin McHale could have been arguably an MVP on another team, like the Cavs in the early 80s. He could have been leading that team and been possibly in an MVP race. Robert Parrish was good. I wouldn't say he was, MVP material, but he was a great serviceable player. And of course, Larry Bird was a 3-time consecutive MVP. And to me, that was somewhat like a super team, just like the Lakers in that time, the Showtime Lakers. They had Kareem, Coop, Byron Scott, Magic, a lot of players, Michael Thompson over the years. Bob McAdoo was a former MVP in the league. But when I look at it, during that time, of course, Larry set himself apart from not only being just a great player, great rebounder, all-around player. He could score 40 points, 50 points, 60 points, similar to Michael, but in a different matter and style, of course. But he was clutch also. So at the end of the game, if it was a couple seconds left, he put a lot of fear in people's heart. So at the top of being one of the greatest shooters ever, he's one of the clutchest players you've ever seen. So it's hard to argue why people say he's one of the greatest. And not to forget, Larry Bird was a workhorse. I mean, he averaged 38 minutes per game for his career, played in 12 All-Star games, was selected for 9, NBA first teams, had some defensive team nods. But what really slowed him down was the back injuries. And prior to the back injuries, he had to have bone spurs removed from his feet. And if you look at his career statistics, it's really when those injuries kicked in that changed his career. Like many other great players, he played so many minutes, it took a toll on his body, and he was a very physical player, diving for rebounds, and he would, leave it all on the court, and it started to catch up to him. Because if you look at his numbers, not only was he great in the beginning, he was great throughout his whole career. Even after the injuries, he was great. But if you watch the, Olympic 92 documentary, the back injuries were sidelining him then from even practicing with the team. And that was one of the greatest practices you could have with all of those Hall of Fame players who, if I'm not mistaken, only one player who was Christian Laettner, he was on the team. He's the only non-Hall of Famer on that team, and Larry Bird didn't get to practice with Magic, Michael, Charles, Carl, David Robinson, John Stockton. But all that to say, he was really a workhorse. He loved practicing. He was a very down-to-earth person and humble guy in which fans loved him during a time where, it was like social conflicts, with the white-black conflict, and Larry Bird just was a cool guy. He let it fall off his shoulders in terms of the criticism or the acclaim people tried to give him as far as being the great white hope. He just didn't absorb it. He just was Larry, dude from a small town who liked to tend to his grass and yard on the weekends. He wasn't big into the flashy things, and he was the opposite in terms of contrast in the Hollywood lifestyle and aesthetic of Magic Johnson and the Showtime Lakers, and it made for the perfect show at that time. So Larry Bird, not only was an icon in terms of his work ethic, his performance, his portfolio, winning 3 championships, 3 consecutive MVPs, being part of the 50-40-90 club, but he was a very down-to-earth person, and he'll always be remembered as such. But since so much time has passed, some people might not know how good Larry Bird is, and I wanted to cover that and cover it in sports. And just like his counterpart Magic Johnson, his basketball IQ is out of this world, and he's still involved into basketball. He won a Coach of the Year when he was coaching. He's received the Executive of the Year award, and he's still prominent in basketball. I believe right now he's just a consultant for the various teams. If I'm not mistaken, primarily the Pacers. He's been involved in that organization since he's retired, and he's just been stellar in his performance, not only on the court but off the court. That's my video I have of Larry Bird. Let me know what you think in the comments. Like and subscribe. More on the way. Thank you. Peace.